This podcast offers general information about sleep and wellness, not medical advice. Sleep difficulties can have serious underlying medical and mental health causes. Please consult with a qualified healthcare provider for personalized advice. This podcast complements but does not replace professional care. Hello and welcome to Why Can't I Sleep? I'm Tony, a sleep therapist and social worker. In our last episode, my very first episode, we talked about what insomnia is and how it develops over time. Today, we're going to dive into what actually keeps us staring at the ceiling in the middle of the night and how anxiety and stress affect our sleep and what we can actually do about it. You're lying in bed, you're just physically exhausted after a long day. Your body is screaming for sleep, but your mind is just warming up for an all-night worry marathon. Maybe you're replaying that awkward moment that you had in the team meeting or conversation that you had with a friend. Maybe you're mentally rehearsing tomorrow's presentation for the 100th time, imagining every possible way it could go wrong. Or perhaps you're doing that familiar sleep math that we all know too well. If I fall asleep right now, I only get 6 hours left. How am I going to function? How am I going to survive tomorrow? The mental chatter isn't just frustrating. It can really make you feel like your mind is actively working against you, like it's your worst enemy. But here's something really important to understand. Your brain isn't trying to torture you. In fact, it thinks it's helping. Let me explain what's actually happening. When we experience stress or anxiety, our body activates its threat response system. You might have heard the term fight or flight. Think of it like your body's internal alarm system. Your heart rate increases slightly, your muscles tense up, breathing becomes shallow, and your mind becomes extra alert and vigilant. This response is incredibly helpful for our ancestors when they needed to stay awake to watch for predators. But it's not so helpful when you're trying to drift off before that big meeting tomorrow, or when you're not in any imminent danger. And here's the tricky part. Your body can't tell the difference between a real physical threat and worrying about an unanswered email. To our nervous system, stress is stress, positive or negative. And this is why trying to force yourself to relax often backfires spectacularly. You can't trick your body into feeling safe by just telling it to just relax. I want to share a story from my practice. I worked with a client, let's call her Maria. She was a marketing executive and a single parent and would lie there catastrophizing about every aspect of her life. If she heard her teenager come home late, she'd spiral into the worst case scenarios. If she had an important meeting the next day, she'd spend hours mentally rehearsing every possible outcome. She was a planner and she described herself as a type A kind of personality. But the less that she slept, the more disrupted her sleep, the more her anxiety would ramp up. The more anxious she got, the harder it was to sleep. This created what we call the anxiety sleep cycle. This is something that's really common in people who experience chronic insomnia. Poor sleep makes us more vulnerable to anxiety, and our emotional regulation center just doesn't work as well when we're a bit sleep deprived. And anxiety, as you've probably noticed, makes it harder to sleep. It's like a merry-go-round or a vicious cycle. And there are other professionals that I've worked with who have periods during the year where stress is really high. For example, let's call him Tom. His anxiety showed up differently. Instead of racing thoughts, he'd experience more physical symptoms. He'd feel tightness in his chest, shallow breathing, a knot in his stomach. He'd also have gastrointestinal issues. He had to go to the washroom more at night, and he'd just lie there feeling physically uncomfortable, intense, which made him worry about not being able to sleep. And that made the physical symptoms worse. It's another variation of that very same anxiety sleep cycle. And if this sounds like you, the good news is that there are effective ways to get off this terrible merry-go-round. So let's talk about some practical strategies that you can start to use tonight. We'll start with what I call the time travel thoughts, because so much of our anxiety is about either the future or the past. That's kind of anxiety in a nutshell. First, let's talk about timing. Many people try to process their worries right before bed, but this is like trying to slow down a car while pressing the gas pedal at the same time. Instead, create a worry window or a worry time earlier in the day. And here's how to do that. So pick 15, 20 minutes, some point in your day, at least 2 hours before bed, get comfortable, somewhere not in your bedroom, grab a pencil and a notebook. And I recommend doing this old school with a pen and paper rather than your phone if you can. There's something very powerful about the tactile nature of writing things down. It makes these, thoughts that go through our head solid, something that we can touch, something that we can challenge. I invite you to write down everything that's on your mind. I invite you to write everything down on that piece of paper. Big worries, little worries, tomorrow's to-do lists, get it all out on paper. Now divide your worries into 2 columns, things that you can control and things that you can't control. For the things that you can control, write down one small specific step that you can take tomorrow. It doesn't mean solving that problem entirely, but maybe just a next small step. So not fix my entire career or should I quit, but maybe update my resume, schedule coffee with my mentor, talk to my boss, and be really specific about the time that you're going to do that, if you can. And for the things that you can't control, practice acknowledging them without trying to solve them. Sometimes just seeing our worries on paper helps them lose some of their power. But what about when worries show up at bedtime anyway? What if noisy thoughts are there and it's hard to get off that cycle? The reality is sometimes that happens. And that's just how our minds work. And the more we try to force our minds to be quiet or get into that fight with our brain to quiet down, the more likely that thoughts become loud. So this is a strategy I like to call note and park. And it can come in handy when your mind is still really noisy. The first step is just to acknowledge the thought. Yes, I'm worried about that presentation tomorrow. You don't have to push it away or argue with it. Then imagine parking it in a safe spot until tomorrow's worry window. I'm going to look at this again tomorrow at 10 a.m. Some people even visualize putting their worries in a box and closing the lid. Other people imagine writing them on leaves and letting them float down a stream. One of my clients likes to imagine putting each worry on its own little cloud and watching it float by into the night sky. What matters is the mental act of setting the thought aside for later. Not every thought that comes through our mind is an emergency. So let's practice this together right now. I want you to think about a recent worry that's been keeping you awake. Notice it, name it, and try visualizing putting it somewhere until tomorrow. Maybe it's a box, a leaf, or a cloud, whatever works for you. The key is knowing that you can come back to it later. You're not going to get rid of it forever. And that can be really reassuring to your brain, which may think that whatever it is really important to you. Another powerful tool is what I like to call the 3 a.m. reality check. You know those middle of the night worries can feel incredibly urgent, right? Maybe it's a great idea or a worry that you missed something really important at work. Or maybe the thoughts that convinced you that the world is ending. Here's some questions to give those thoughts a bit of a reality check. Can you actually take any useful action about this right now? Will this feel as urgent in the daylight? Is this thought helping me to move me towards sleep and rest? Am I catastrophizing or imagining the worst possible outcome? And how likely is this to happen? Most of the time, you'll find that 3 a.m. thinking isn't your most reliable thinking. Things that feel catastrophic at night often feel more manageable in the morning. I had a client who would lie awake planning detailed responses to emails she hadn't even received yet. When she started using these reality check questions, she was able to recognize when her mind was creating problems that didn't actually exist yet. So we've talked about mental or cognitive strategies. So now let's talk about physical strategies, because anxiety isn't just in our heads, it also lives in our bodies. When you notice anxiety ramping up, I invite you to try this brief body scan. Start with your toes and notice if there's any tension there. And as you exhale, let that tension melt away. Move to your feet, your ankles, your calves, working your way up your body. There's no need to force relaxation, just simply notice what's there. And this isn't about falling asleep either. It's about just bringing your attention to your body instead of your racing thoughts or the mental noise. Another technique I really like is called 5-4-3-2-1. And here's how it works. We're going to focus on our senses. Can you notice 5 things that you can feel? Maybe it's the weight of your blanket, the texture of your sheets, the temperature of your air, or the position of your hands, or the feeling of your breath moving in and out. Can you notice 4 things that you can hear? Perhaps it's the distant traffic or the hum of a fan or the sound of your own breathing. Notice any sounds that exist in the quiet of the night. Now notice 3 things that you can see if your eyes are open. Or imagine if your eyes are closed. Maybe it's moonlight through the window, or the shadows on the wall, or a peaceful scene in your mind. Now notice 2 things that you can smell. Maybe it's the light scent of your laundry detergent, or the texture or feeling of the night air, whatever is present in your space. Now notice 1 thing that you can taste, even if it's just the taste in your mouth. Again, this technique isn't about relaxation or forcing yourself to feel calm. It's about anchoring yourself in the present moment instead of getting too caught up in the worries about the future or the past. It's about allowing space to tell your body and your mind that you're safe. I find that this strategy works really well for people who have really busy analytical minds, because it gently gives the mind something to focus on instead of the mental noise or worries. Now, finally, let's address something that often trips up a lot of people, especially people who struggle with insomnia: the difference between helpful and unhelpful thinking, especially about sleep. Not all nighttime thinking is bad. If you're doing some productive problem solving and creative thinking, you're using your imagination to visualize, that's a little bit different from anxious rumination. And here are some signs that your thinking has tipped into unhelpful territory. You're experiencing the same thoughts that keep circling with no new insights. You're thinking about the what ifs rather than actual problems. Your thoughts are so focused on things that you can't control. You're experiencing physical signs of anxiety, tension, racing heart, discomfort, and you're time traveling too far into the past or into the future, and it's creating a lot of worry for you. When you start to notice these signs, it's probably time to shift gears. Remember that you can't control what thoughts show up, but you can control how much you engage with them and when and how. For this, I really recommend keeping like a dim light or one of those reading lights and a notebook by your bed. If a worry feels really important, jot it down briefly and return to it tomorrow. Often what feels urgent at night feels less pressing in the morning. The clients I've worked with likes to put these pieces of paper into a worry deposit box. She's not ignoring her concerns. She's inviting relaxation by putting them somewhere else, somewhere safe, until she can deal with them at a better time. When you're trying to reduce anxiety and worry at night, the goal isn't to eliminate anxiety or unhelpful thoughts completely. That's not realistic or even necessary for good sleep, because ultimately sleep is a physiological process. Once you get out of its way, sleep will often unfold on its own at its own time. And the goal here is to develop a different relationship with nighttime worry. One where it doesn't have so much power over your sleep and ability to find rest. If you're dealing with severe anxiety that's affecting multiple areas of your life, it's really affecting how you experience the day and your ability to cope. It's really important to reach out to a mental health professional, talk to your doctor or counselor if you have one, but recognize it's not just about sleep. Working with someone can help you develop a more comprehensive approach to managing anxiety, and this often improves sleep as well. In our next episode, we're going to explore the power of routines and rhythms in improving sleep. We'll look at why timing matters so much for sleep and how to create routines that work with your body's natural cycles and not against them. Thank you so much for listening to Why Can't I Sleep? If you found this episode helpful, please subscribe and leave a review so that other people can find this information as well. And please visit quadrawellness.com for more resources and connect with me on social media at Quadra Wellness. I would love to hear your thoughts, questions, and feedback. In the meantime, I wish you a good night.